and it's my blessing to be able to facilitate the conversation that's going to take place over the next hour or so. I want to introduce our panelists to you. Theophia Jackson is a PhD and is a licensed clinical psychologist who received her master's degree in clinical psychology from Howard University and her doctorate from the Wright Institute in Berkeley. Dr. Jackson is the 2019 to 2021 president for the Association of Black Psychologists and the past president for the Bay Area chapter. She's an accomplished scholar, practitioner, and the chair of the Clinical Psychology degree program at Saybrook University. Welcome, Doctor. Dr. Michael A. Lindsay is the executive director of the Silver Institute for Poverty Policy and Research, and Constance and Martin Silver, professor of poverty studies at New York University's Silver School of Social Work. Michael's current research, funded by the Robin Hood Foundation and the Anne E. Casey Foundation, involves the delivery of an innovative intervention aimed at decreasing PTSD and depression symptoms and improving positive parenting skills among child welfare-involved mothers with trauma-related disorders. Welcome, Doc. Good to see you. The Reverend Dr. Jamal Harrison Bryant combines sound biblical teaching, business acumen, and political insight to propel the body of Christ to action and to greater levels of faith. Since his youth, Dr. Bryant has prevailed against the odds, rising from a GED to a PhD. Prior to pastoring, he served as the National Youth and College Director of the NAACP for 6 years, where he helped to mobilize over 70,000 youth worldwide in nonviolent campaigns. He is currently the senior pastor of the New Birth Missionary Baptist Church in Lithonia, Georgia. Welcome, Doc.
Thank you, Anna.
Finally, last but definitely not least, is Dr. Donna Holland Barnes, who is currently founder and CEO of the DHB Wellness and Associates LLC, where she conducts life coaching, grief recovery, and suicide prevention training on suicide risk management. As a certified master trainer for suicide prevention and intervention, Dr. Barnes trains faculty, staff, and students, as well as the community, on how to recognize the signs of someone who is in a suicidal crisis. She is also the founder of the National Organization for People of Color Against Suicide, NOPCAS, after losing her son to suicide while he was in college. Welcome, Doctor, and thank you for being here. I want to thank each of you for being here, and I want to start our discussion with a question.
Associated with the pandemic, and also I would add the perfect storm, if you will, of the pandemic and racial unrest, which sort of engenders a sense of hopelessness for Black youth around the quality of their life, their humanity and the respect for it. And so all of these issues, heretofore, we've already said had an impact on Black youth, and I can only imagine that these circumstances are going to exacerbate it. What we know is that from 1991 through 2017, there was a 73% increase among Black adolescent teenagers in terms of their engagement in suicide attempts. And so, again, with this, the circumstances we're in, I imagine that those numbers are going to continue to increase.
Thank you, Doctor. Dr. Barnes, usually when people have a conversation, they want to know how someone is doing. And they'll ask, well, how are you feeling? Is that the question? Is that question helpful in this time? Does it add pressure on an individual to answer positively? And what is the best approach to finding out how someone is really doing?
That's a good question. During this time, we are all responsible for mental health care. It's all of our responsibilities to care for our family, our neighbors, our friends, and ourselves. And asking that question, I don't think it's going to put pressure on anybody. If it puts pressure on you, then you're just not going to answer it and you'll turn it to the other person. I'm fine. How are you? But when you ask the question, please be sincere. Please be sincere and ask them specifically, how is your week? How has your week been? Don't say, how are you? How has your week been? And then they're inclined to actually answer that. Or, how is your day going? And they're inclined to answer that. And when you ask it, please listen, because we don't have very good listening skills, even though we think that we do. And again, when you ask it, stop talking, don't say anything. Let them tell you how their week was or how their day is going. And it's not a time to interrupt somebody and say, oh, wow, that happened to me also. Forget about your experiences. You ask the person how their week has been, let them do all the talking until they're done. And you'll know that they're done when they'll say, and how has your week been? Or how is your day going? But let them talk until they're done, because oftentimes they don't get a chance to share. They don't get a chance to share what they're going through on a daily basis. So you're giving them the opportunity to talk about it. So it's a very important question. And please, please reach out to your friends, families, neighbors, and ask them how their week has been.
Hey, is it safe to say to them or to just bring up the fact that I'm really checking, because I know we're all going through something with this COVID settling in and safe distancing and the isolation that comes with it, and to have you specifically direct them to talk about their feelings or their experiences in relation to that?
That's a good idea to do that also. You can be really specific and ask them about that. That's an excellent idea.
So, Congresswoman Coleman, may I add to that as well and expand?
Yes, Dr. Jackson.
Because I really appreciate how you responded to that, Dr. Barnes. And what I wanted to offer is what I might say the, quote, psychology and cultural responsiveness behind that, which is for people of African ancestry on these shores, we have been silenced in our pain for so long that it is important for us to actually practice being able to have courageous healing conversations, to really be able to sit down and say, this is how I'm feeling, and have that validated and heard. And then, as you said, the listener also has to have the courage and the capacity to listen. We have been messaged to so long that our feelings don't count, or if they do, they're judged, i.e. the angry Black woman. Right? So when you do start to share, so I just want to close by saying from a cultural perspective that we as people of African ancestry, we know our feelings and we know our spiritualness, but yet we've been in a setting, so it's what's been happening to us, we've been in a setting that has silenced us for so many years and not listened, or if they did, we were judged and punished. So we've been socialized into holding our feelings in. We've been socialized into making someone else feel comfortable by not sharing what we're really feeling. So I want to add to what you're saying, that this will take a collective effort on all of our parts to say, not only do I value you enough to ask, I value myself enough to actually listen.
Thank you, Dr. Jackson. Let me ask you a question in particular. The number of deaths from COVID-19 is approaching 150,000, and our Black community is faring worse than any other. An NPR analysis found that in 32 states, plus Washington, D.C., Black Americans are dying at rates higher than their proportion of the population. And in 21 states, it's substantially higher, more than 50% above what would be expected. How do we as a community handle this reality? What needs to be done? I think you may be muted.
My apologies. I was just going to say thank you for that very easy question. First and foremost, I do want to bring greetings and appreciation to the Congressional Black Caucus for inviting the Association of Black Psychologists to this table. We've had a long-standing good relationship. So the Association of Black Psychologists is here because what's important to us is to be able to illuminate the African spirit, liberate the African mind, and also activate and empower the African character. I say that because we exist for the question you just answered, and I'm going to answer it this way. The disproportionate rate in which this pandemic is impacting us was clearly going to happen. We recognize that because of all of the disparities. This is not the first pandemic that we've been contending with. We've been contending with seen and unseen pandemics for a very long time. As we deal with this reality, we must also remind our people of that we have the cultural, the spiritual essence to move through this, and we will. Because the sheer fact that we're still here after the multiple atrocities and the pandemics that we've been part of is evidence of our resilience, our perseverance, our survivalness. So I would say the real question for me along this is, how are we doing what we do, and how do we maximize that? How do we build upon that? And part of it is what we're doing here is bringing together the Black geniusness, and particularly the intersectionality of psychology with our faith leaders, because we should be more focused on psycho-spirituality as we're dealing with this. So I'm going to close by saying we will still have to deal with the realities of disproportionate access to care. What's happening to us is what it was clearly going to be predicted because of all these other issues. But how we get through it now is dependent upon what we're going to do collectively. And one of the things that the association would like to bring to the Congressional Black Caucus is that we authored a 10-point Black recovery plan. And that might be one place to start this critical conversation, because I think it will require all of the Black organizations coming together to create a Black collective that can leverage all of its power to heal our communities. And CBC is uniquely positioned to bring such powerhouse together.
Well, we look forward to seeing that and sharing that information. Dr. Bryan, I'd like to bring you into this discussion because Dr. Jackson just referred to both the intersection of our psychological well-being and our spiritual well-being. As a pastor, I know you've got to be experiencing some pretty heavy-duty things with funeralizing people who've died from this pandemic, dealing with the families who had to endure the dying of a loved one without being there with them, and all of those things that you've had to do virtually now in communicating with your congregants and reminding them of the substance of faith and what it means and how we get through this, and recognizing, because you're such an intellectual, the psychological impact that is taking place as well.
The reality is absolutely brutal. My colleagues on today would be much more astute than I, but the suicide hotline rates have gone up by 1,000%. You're seeing depression and anxiety at alarming rates. You speak to funerals. I've just had to hire on 2 more bereavement counselors for our church in areas that you don't even think about in surface level. Dr. Lindsay, the whole issue we've been grappling with is families at odds, because here in Georgia, only 10 people can get in the funeral home. And so how do you decide who are the 10? And what wedge that then brings on to the rest of the family. I did a Zoom Congresswoman 2 days ago to my church, apologizing because a year ago, I brought Kanye West to my church for him to perform. It was an amazing day. And I said, as a pastor, I failed because I didn't do my due diligence as a pastor to really cover him in his own emotional balance. And the church has got to be responsible. We've got data that shows that particularly in the Black community, African Americans will go to their pastor 40% faster than they will a therapist. And yet mental health is still a taboo in our community and in our churches. And pastors have to champion the cause that you can have Jesus and the therapist. One does not negate the other, but that they work in partnership. If we would really recalibrate how much energy, emphasis, and faith that we extend for those who are dealing with physical issues, that we would do the exact same thing for those who are contending with emotional duress. And so I know that the church has blood dripping from its hands from really not being accountable in this space. But I'm hoping that the church will now move in, especially in the backdrop of COVID-19, that there are some issues, Congresswoman, you probably going to have to bring us back the next 6 months for the aftermath of quarantine that we don't know. We can't even pivot to on what are the numbers of children who, because of quarantine, are trapped in the house with a molester. We would have no idea of the numbers of women who are trapped in the house with an abuser. Yeah. I have no idea how many couples now, in this being 176th day of quarantine, who realize the love is not there. How do I now function? This is the largest rate of unemployment that we've seen. August is going to be the highest level of evictions that we've seen since the stock market crash in 1929. And so I, along with the rest of the panelists, are really going to have to come together with coming up with a foolproof plan. And you add on top of that this whole uprising of Black Lives Matter with George Floyd, what is glaring to us, what we've always known, but is now risen to the surface, is Black people don't have the luxury of choosing one crisis. We've got to contend on several different fronts at the exact same time.
Amen. Yes. I'm going to ask you a real quick question because I want to follow up with Dr. Lindsay about something that you just said about how we're contending with everything. My faith is very important to me, and I was, one of those faithful churchgoers, and sometimes that's not necessarily an indication of where your faith is. That's sometimes what you're just accustomed to doing. But I think that the faith-based community has a huge role here. Do you think that there's the prospects of having interdenominational interaction and discussions to develop plans of action and approaches that will work through the faith-based community? If you're a Baptist, Methodist, Kojic, or whatever, do you think that the institutions of our various faith beliefs can come together interdenominationally and accomplish that and have a bigger, more structured? I know you have a very structured approach to this, and that impressed me when you were in D.C. But I want to know, how do we get there with everybody who's in this sort of space? I'm going to put that on you, Dr. Bryant.
I think that was a Dr. Lindsay.
Yeah, I'm gonna follow up with something on it with him.
No, I think that it is so critical that we're not just dealing with data and analytics, but really I'm interested to see my dear sister who just spoke her 10-point plan of what it is that we do. My youth ministry is in crisis. We're in crisis. This class of 2020 is dealing with trauma untold. I did a virtual graduation about 2 months ago and said, this class of 2020, I'm giving this to the therapists for free. Y'all can use it. You ain't even got to quote me. This is my Christmas gift to you. This class of 2020 was born during 9/11. And they were born during a national crisis. And now, the next most critical moment of their life, they are in a catastrophe. So if you can imagine, no graduation, no prom, no spring break, and now they've met with the glaring news, they can't go away to college. It's all now virtual. So how it is that we do it, all of us are amateurs on how to navigate a pandemic. So I'm here as much as I am to share, but really to learn and figure out what it is that I can take back, because every level of church that I know, and I'm a third generation preacher, none of it is applicable to this space that I'm in now.
Right.
We are a Congresswoman. When COVID started, we were giving out 300 bags of groceries a month, and now I'm doing 8,000 a week. And so when you deal with all of the different variables that are now contributing to stressors and triggers, and transparently, all I took in seminary was one pastoral counseling class. I am not fully breasted for years amongst us. My sister is a clinical therapist, for full transparency. My sister's a clinical therapist at Pepperdine University, and I probably owe her a couple of checks because I have to call her from a corner to say, what do I do now? What am I supposed to say? And so I've named my sister, who is a therapist, my bishop. She is my covering, walking me through this process. So I'm really just trying to figure it out from Dr. Jackson and others who are on.
And thank you.
I would like to help out my brother too. So
help me,
Doctor, to answer him. And I would actually ask if we can even allow ourselves to reimagine a question. I appreciate you asking, could all the denominations come together? But once again, that is separating us, that's fragmenting us. If we draw upon the knowledge that Black scholars have brought forward from the continent to the here and now, it is that level of information that needs to be joined with our faith-based work so that we can be more knowledgeable of what is the African culture within us that we need, because that's the glue that binds, is the spiritness of being of African ancestry, even though it may manifest itself differently. But we're clear that's also where the healing and the power to move through all pandemics sit. So how powerful would it be if we came together and really worked on psycho-spiritual wellness? And not the differentiation of spiritual over here in this thing called mental illness, which is more problem focused. If we came together and promoting psycho-spiritual wellness from within our cultural stance, then we will all be better and be better armed, because we need our spiritual leaders in this with us and vice versa. They are one and the same.
Thank you, Doc. Thank you very much. You're absolutely on it. I mean, this is like, that's what I feel like. I want to throw this question at Dr. Lindsay, because, I know we're in unprecedented times. Reverend Brian, I know that the 2020 graduates, whether they're high school or college, are going to do amazing things because they came through an unprecedented, amazing time in order to accomplish the end of something and the beginning of something else. And so I expect the very best of them, but then I know we have an obligation to be there for them in a way that is unprecedented as well, and to really be the eyes and the ears, and on a very acute level. The outcry against the police violence that has continued in a sustained way since the murders of Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, and George Floyd, and so many others, has forced the Black community to experience a lot of indirect trauma through its news coverage, difficult conversations with colleagues and neighbors, even being afraid to be out on the streets, what's happening in places like Portland, and things of that ilk. And that's on top of the stress of this normal, quote unquote, COVID existence that we are experiencing. How do we as people process all these things at the same time? I want to throw that up to you, Dr. Lindsay.
It's incredibly daunting. For example, all the things that you have indicated. It's incredibly daunting to think about how to move forward. I mean, I think Dr. Bryant said best. We have no blueprint for this, right? Because, as I said earlier, there's been this perfect storm of these factors that have come together. Dr. Jackson has talked about, the fact that we are persistently living in a pandemic with respect to, our perspectives on race and inequality that are constantly experienced among us as people of color. And so, how do we contend with it? How do we deal with it? Is something that there really is no master blueprint. So I'm also interested in the 10-point plan that was mentioned earlier. But oftentimes what has happened in this space, though, Congresswoman, is that we have been told that we should, grin and bear it, that we should tough it out and get over it. But the reality is that, these things impact us. When you are experiencing mental health issues that are unresolved, it actually has a connection to your physical health. It weakens your immune system and makes you susceptible to all kinds of health outcomes. And that's why we see, a lot of disparities with respect to hypertension, diabetes, et cetera. There's this interconnection that is all related to the lived experiences of what it means to be Black in this society. And so I think that, we have to think about, how we're going to manage and channel through this. And it will take some level of us coming together and thinking about, in what ways can the church and the mental health community collaborate and think through what that plan will look like. And I think we are dependent upon our elected officials to guide us. And I'm thankful to you, Congresswoman, for even seeing that this issue of Black youth suicide was an epidemic that needed to have a legislative mandate attached to it so that results might be seen. And so I think it's going to take that level of commitment from all of us who have a vested interest.
Thanks, Dr. Lindsay. Hey, Dr. Jackson, could you give us a real quick summary of the 10-point plan? Just because I think everybody on this town hall panel is very interested in knowing, but do you think you could give us a snapshot? I know it's not one of the questions I was going to ask you, but
I know. It's good. I will in just one moment, but I wanted to again extend the conversation with the question you just posed to Dr. Lindsay. And I want to remind us all that, again, our people survived a pandemic. We're missing a crucial question. We have to better understand how did our ancestors get through what they got through in order for us to be in this moment. Because if we understand that, it too becomes part of the blueprint for moving forward. And I would submit to you, in the science of Black psychology, in terms of our cultural values, practices, and belief, and the traditions, that information is there. And we've been using it in our scholarship, we've been using it in our treatment, but again, it hasn't been able to get out to the masses. So I would be remiss if I didn't say this now, which is, again, thanking CBC for this platform to get this message out greater. And I'm also reminded of a conversation I had with Dr. Linda James Myers, who reminded me that our Congressman Louis Stokes, I believe was his name, actually was a keynote speaker at our convention in 2015. And when he finished being on that panel, one of the things he said was, if all of Congress, if all the Congressional Black Caucus understood the roots of who we are in Black psychology, it would arm them more in doing the work. And we didn't have a chance to follow through on that. So I want to make that invitation again, too. Maybe this is that moment. Maybe this is that time, because of the door that you've opened up, that we can merge that information and actually moving forward. The 10-point plan, and I want to give a shout out to Dr.
Can I just say something about that, what you just said? We need to talk offline and talk about how do we push out this sort of who we are and how we have survived and why that makes us uniquely qualified to survive and get through this too. And so perhaps that is a town hall all of its own.
Yes.
And so thank you. I will take that back to our illustrious chair, Karen Bass, and see that we can follow up.
Thank you, because we've been messaged that we're a problem. We've been mirrored to say that we're always supposed to be on the top of somebody's problem list and the bottom of somebody's good list. When you're asking the wrong question, you're looking for the wrong thing. Come at us. What is our strengths? How do we continue to stand in spite of? So thank you for that. So the 10-point plan, as I was beginning to say, I want to give a shout out to both Dr. Lawford Goddard and Dr. Wade Nobles, who saw fit to get these conversations started. And it does speak to an economic way of recovery for us, a mental health way. It has healthcare in there. They've even budgeted for you. So it's a blueprint that I think can start a conversation, and let's see where it goes and what we can make of that. And we're happy to share, and I'm glad that there's an interest for it.
My staffer is telling me that we have a lot of people in the audience who have questions, and that rather than our continuing to go through our questions, we want to throw it over to get some of the questions from the audience, because a very important issue here is making sure that people feel connected and they feel not only are they engaged with us, not only are they beneficiaries of information from us, but that we're also beneficiaries of their concerns and their questions, and that we can respond to those. But before we throw it over to the audience, my understanding that I have a colleague that's on the line with us, Representative Hank Johnson from, I think, the 4th District in Georgia. And I know that he has a specific question that he wants to, or concern that he wishes to raise. Representative Johnson?
Okay, Congresswoman, you were breaking up badly, so I assume I'm going to take for granted that you finished your kind introduction, and now it's time for me to ask my question. But I want to thank you, and I want to thank the Congressional Black Caucus for hosting this very important issue forum for our people, because mental health is something that has been stigmatized in our community for a long time, particularly among men. And so it's time that we kind of pull the wraps off of that and admit that we do have mental health challenges in amongst us. And I represent a district that is at least 60% African American. And so I know that we have mental health concerns and challenges in my district. And so I appreciate the opportunity to ask a question. Dr. Jackson, and by the way, I see my good friend, Pastor Jamal Bryan is on the line, and good to see you, sir. And it was real nice to be with you last week as we celebrated the lives of the 3 deceased gentlemen in 2020, our civil rights heroes, John Lewis, Joseph Lowry, and C.T. Vivian. It was a really great event at New Birth. So thank you for hosting that. Dr. Jackson, Black and minority communities are often left out or are severely underrepresented in clinical studies. And that is particularly true in the mental health field. And I'd like for you to tell me whether or not that's true or not. And if it's true, I'd like to know have there been clinical studies about the correlation between social injustices, racism, oppression, and negative mental health outcomes for Black Americans, including higher rates of suicide among young Black men?
I appreciate the question, and yet I want to contextualize it a little further before I answer it. In the context, I want to say in some ways it's a challenging question because it's predicated upon the assumption that the research studies are in fact the right ones for us. And what I mean by that is much of what we are still contending with are the direct residuals of being exposed to white supremacy ideology and capitalism. Untreated, undiagnosed, undealt with cultural trauma. So if all of this is happening to us, then how we're acting makes perfect sense. And when I think about the mental health industry that I'm trained in and what my own training was, the numbers will show. The American Psychological Association does a demographic data every year. And for the last 10 plus years or so, it says something like, of all the psychologists out there, only 20% are people of color. Of that, only 4% are people who identify as African American or Black. And the knowledge that I'm speaking to you about that Association of Black Psychologists has in the literature and the science on Black psychology around theories and practices and treatments that work for us are not part of the academy. They're not part of the dominant training and discourse that people coming through the graduate schools are going to have. Those who are in an HBCU are introduced to it. But as you know, that's a small handful of all who are offering degrees in mental health and healthcare in general. So there's a crucial piece of information that's not there. So everything else that comes from it is a false narrative. So it's not that I don't think our outcome would be any better if we were part of those studies, because they're not studying the problem that's driving us crazy. It's just going to make us look like we're the crazy ones again. And even this idea of us with us, our people, for me, do not have a stigma with mental health. It's that they recognize when they come into the space, what they're getting is not treating what their needs are. I can't tell you, over the years, I've been in spaces where before I got there, they would say the myth, Black folks don't come to therapy. By the time I'm there and I'm training up the next generation of mental health providers across all walks of life, not just Black folks, all of a sudden our people are better consumers of mental health. They're able to respond. And let me say this part too. We have to be active consumers as mental health and not passive. What I mean by that is it's less to say, do you have a Black therapist? The question is, do you understand the implications of being exposed to cultural racism and systemic oppression for years, and how that's literally driving me crazy? We have a science that shows that it actually leads to us having hypertension and all these other ills. So why wouldn't we understand that it leads to our mental health illness as well too? So if your treatment is not fixing the ultimate root problem, then I'm always going to be sick. I'm being socialized to be a patient. And so the research studies are not asking the right question. This is more complicated than an evidence-based practice. Evidence-based practice is helping you with behaviors, but how do you help someone deal with the long-standing implications of disenfranchisement, healthcare disparities, dealing with someone else's implicit and explicit racism? Our systems in America are all built on this institution. This is why it must be an anti-racist approach to everything. When mental health and healthcare services does its own anti-racist review, then we can be better utilizers of that service. However, until then, we have it in Black psychology. Sorry.
Thank you, Dr. Jackson. Can I just ask to bring Michael Lindsay into this for a moment, because I think that was a very important question about the whole issue of research, because one of the things that we did find that there wasn't sufficient research being done into the areas that needed to be done by the people who needed to do it to be able to deliver that relevant service. Yes. And I know Michael has a very strong opinion on this because we work together on the task force. So, Doc, let me hand it over to you a second, Dr. Lindsay.
Absolutely. Thank you, Congresswoman, because I did want to respond to Representative Johnson's point. One of the things that we call for in the report that we submitted to you, Congresswoman, is for more research to be done to establish an evidence base for Black youth related to suicide and other correlated issues like depression, anxiety, trauma. There is a relative dearth of Blacks who are participating in the randomized controlled trials And it is problematic. And one of the things that we highlighted in a report to you, Congresswoman, is that we need more researchers of color to be trained on the research methods and also the psychology and mental health interventions to be able to go back to our communities and do the work. We know that when you train people who look like the communities that they serve, they're likely to go back to their communities and give back in terms of the mental health intervention and strategies that need to be done with our communities. And so I think that training the next generation of providers becomes really important. And what we've known is that an NIH reported this themselves, that less than 4% of those who are funded are African American. And that is paltry and definitely disproportionate to the need for those providers to do the research and to do the mental health intervention development necessary to address this issue. And so I thank you, Congresswoman, for placing that language in appropriations in your bill to address this issue, because something is being done, and we're thankful to you for that.
Thank you.
Congresswoman,
Dr. Jackson, I've been informed we only have a few minutes left, and I do want us to get to some of the audience questions, because I do want them to feel that this is participatory. And if you want to wrap up at the end when I ask you about, okay.
Thank you. Good point. Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
So our first question from the audience is about distance learning in COVID-19. How do we help students who are distance learning, ensuring that their mental health is supported throughout that process?
I'd like.
Go ahead, Dr. Bryant.
Yes. What it is that we are crafting here at Newbirth is a couple of things. The educators amongst us will know that 40% of what it is was retained from students in May is lost by September when it is that they go back. These students have been out of class basically since mid-March. And haven't been engaged. There's a level of crisis, Congresswoman, that we're entrusting home education by and large to parents who didn't even go to PTA. And so we are drafting out of retirement for former educators to go back to the immediate past history of Sunday school. Sunday school wasn't just about coloring Noah's Ark and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Those Sunday school teachers were educators vocationally during the week. Those of us who grew up in the church, you remember you had to read in a semicircle. Mm-hmm. You read a verse, somebody else read a verse so that you could understand, the teacher could hear comprehension and where it is that you were in your learning. To answer more directly, we're trying to really pull together pools of support. So our church has crafted 12 different Zoom licenses. So every different age group or grade group has their own Zoom for parents to have support and for young people to be able to walk through and participate in catching up, not just in education, but also in emotional wholeness.
Congresswoman, I can also add to that real quick that we are transferring all of our evidence-based interventions that we do with Black and Latino youth here in New York City to a telepsychiatry platform, and ensuring that those kids who have been connected to our treatments or that need to be connected to the treatment will be able to use those services via telepsychiatry. Now, the issue is that we should talk about is the disconnection that a lot of kids of color are facing with respect to technology now. And so we're working through that issue with New York City as well.
I think it's really important to know we recognize that, and we've had enough time here for our school districts and for our local governments and all to prepare for this, and for our federal government to recognize that it needs to step in to this place with resources, not tomorrow, not next week, not next month, but right now.
And how do we bring in rituals into that space? Again, that cultural groundedness. If they're coming into school, like Dr. Bryant said, there's a ritual of welcoming the children and loving them up to prepare their minds and bodies for the learning and their spirits for the learning they're about to have. So even though we're sitting in this chaotic time, this may actually be a real time to correct, to get us back to how we know our children actually learn, which is in the loving connection that they can get in this level of intentionality.
Yeah. Thank you, Doc. Courtney, is there another question?
Yes, there is. The next question is, how do we make existing federal mental health programs like the Suicide Prevention Lifeline, et cetera, more equitable and accessible to the Black community? And if not, are there other resources that are stronger for us specifically?
So I'm going to throw that to Dr. Lindsay, but I want to say that as an appropriator, Barbara Lee and Brenda Lawrence and Sanford Bishop and I are well aware of the responsibility we have as appropriators to look out for the resources that need to go into things of this nature. But I know that Michael has some really interesting issues and concerns and some ideas about how we do this. So let me throw it over to you, Doc.
Thank you, Congresswoman. We have to do away with this notion that if you build it, they will come to it. We know that when Black folks are struggling with mental health challenges, they're not going to pick up a hotline and call it. And so if they're going to build these portals and platforms for our folks to be connected to, then we have to ensure that we are doing our due diligence to make sure that they are connected to it. And so I think then working with, folks like Dr. Bryan and the church and understanding that that's where we're likely to take our current cares and concerns is really critical. And so how do we build the capacity then of the churches to be responsive to mental health needs? And so I'm encouraged to hear Dr. Bryan talk about the things that he's done in his church. And we know other churches that are taking that step to ensure that folks who are coming to their churches are connected to those mental health supports. But again, I don't think that we are talking enough about the fact that our way of accessing mental health supports is not always through a support line. While they're important, I think we need to figure out how to make them more accessible to populations.
I think that as we need to recognize the lanes that we're in. I'm in a legislative lane and an appropriations lane, and I need the kind of ideas and thinking experiences that the experts we have on this panel have had to feed into us to tell us, these are the kinds of things that need to be funded. This is the particular or unique perspective that ought to be addressed as we're moving through the legislative process and the appropriations process.
Right. And I think something else to your point that would need to be addressed is, again, what would it be like if we were able to leverage training? So it's not just the training of the current approaches in our Western ways of thinking, but it's also the training of who we are as cultural folk. Mm-hmm. I still would submit to you that in Black psychology, we have theories, practices, interventions, approaches that have been well received by our people. And evidence of that is also the design of the emotional emancipation circles that we did with the Community Healing Network. So how do we bring the science of Black psychology to this table so that we're training the researchers themselves? Because again, if they're asking the wrong question, we don't want to send a Black face in there still asking the wrong question. Can this be an interactive learning? How do they better learn who we are from our cultural wisdom and knowledge? And then that will shape the science as well.
Yeah, thanks, Doc. I wanted to bring Dr. Barnes into this for a moment because Dr. Barnes is interested in it, or is sort of focus on our wellness, our holistic wellness, and as it relates to the delivery of services, what we should be delivering and what we should be expecting. And so I'm just wondering, Dr. Barnes, if you might want to contribute something to this discussion.
Thank you, Congresswoman Coleman. We're not always quick to go to your clinicians. We're not necessarily going to go to a church. There are other ways of getting mental health treatment or recognizing the things that you're going through, and that's through support groups. There is a organization called Depression Bipolar Support Alliance. It's a national organization that is in just about every state where they have support groups. necessarily going to go to a church. There are other ways of getting mental health treatment or recognizing the things that you're going through, and that's through support groups. There is a organization called Depression Bipolar Support Alliance. It's a national organization that is in just about every state, where they have support groups for everything. They have support groups for someone suffering from bipolar, support groups for people suffering from depression. Oftentimes, support groups are a lot advantageous to an individual who doesn't necessarily want to go to a clinician or cannot afford to go to a clinician. They can sit in a circle, or now it's through Zoom, and discuss what they're going through. I myself have 2 support groups. I have one for my national organization for people of color against suicide. And it's for families who have lost someone to suicide. If you go to our website, nopcus.org, and sign up and register for the support group, that's one of the things that you can do to get through your loss, or as you're grieving your loss. I have another one through my LLC that's already in progress. The next, I do it for 8 weeks. The next 8-week session will be sometime in October. But support groups are very advantageous for the community to come together. Because again, it's just not the clinician's responsibility. It's all of our responsibility to take care of one another. And we also have to take care of ourselves. Absolutely. We have a responsibility to take care of ourselves. Yeah. Stop being so angry and stop being a part of this stuff that's going out into the streets. And you put your energy on what you're for, not what you're against.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Dr. Barnes. I'm told we've got the capacity to have 2 quick questions, and then I want to be able to wrap up with each of you, and so that you're able to share some of the things that we talked about that would be helpful to those who are listening and those who are going to share what they're hearing today with people that they know in their communities. Courtney, we have another question?
Yeah. The criminal justice system has often become the place where Black people experience and get mental health support. How do we build away from that being the case? How do we ensure that the criminal justice system is not our mental health provider for Black communities?
I'd like to start. I'm sorry. Go ahead. Dr.
Oh, no, it's fine. Well, there's such a thing called CIT. It's crisis intervention training that many of the police officers engage in. And I think if we ensure, as we talk about restructuring the police departments, if we can ensure that this training is mandatory, so that they will not necessarily arrest somebody and they'll get them the help that they need. But that was a good question.
Yeah, I think that one of the things that we have in the George Floyd justice and policing legislation is trying to build out sort of responses from mental health professionals and other healthcare professionals, and that when calls do go out, police don't always go out on their own. They go out with a professional that can deal with the issue that might have to do with someone having a sort of a mental health episode or something of that nature. And so we need to reimagine how we're applying our resources and how we're creating these partnerships between law enforcement and the professional mental and physical health communities, so that those who are in need at that moment get exactly what they need and not something that they don't. I think we have time for one last question.
Sure. This last one is about, with everything happening right now and everything that tends to happen throughout the lives of Black people, how do we avoid becoming desensitized to all that we have to endure? And how do we ensure that we are capable of finding the help and support that we need?
Can I throw that to Dr. Bryant and to every one of them? Could I have your reflections on that question? I think that's an exceedingly important question.
It is. I have challenged and championed our church that when you think about fasting, it shouldn't always be about food. But I've challenged our congregants to do intermittent fasting from social media, because sometimes you can be so bombarded with images in stories and trauma that you don't even realize that you have to disconnect. Congressman, I was in the middle of a demonstration for George Floyd here in Atlanta, as you very well know, you knew me from when I was pastoring in Baltimore. And in the middle of this demonstration for George Floyd, I started chanting for Freddie Gray. And I realized that I had undocumented PTSD and needed to take a step back because I'd been going from protest to rally to protest and realized that sometimes you need to disconnect and feed yourself with positive images and to really zone out and be careful about what music you listen to, that you're reading stuff that will build you up, that you will see quarantine not as punishment, but as an imposed retreat to just settle yourself, that we're so used to going that we don't know how to settle. And so I would ask people to really be intentional about self-care.
Thank you. Can I go up from Dr. Lindsay, Dr. Barnes, and Dr. Jackson to get your kind of quick reflections on this question about the insensitivity that might exist from seeing too much, too long?
Do you want it in that order? Okay.
Okay. Yes. So yeah, there is a tendency to become hardened, when you constantly see the loop of those vicious attacks on our humanity. But the reality is that it hurts us. Dr. Bryant just said best. He was in a George Floyd protest, realizing that he still had residue from Freddie Gray. And so it then becomes incredibly important for us to constantly engage in the care of ourselves, to realize that even though you see it and you may think you're becoming desensitized to it, that it is impacting you. And so it's likely to show up in ways that are unintended or you never imagined. And so I think connecting to self-care, therapy, all those kinds of issues that you can bring to that context become really important.
Thank you. Dr. Barnes, you want to weigh in here?
I love Dr. Bryant's idea of fasting from social media. We also need to fast from the TV, because we watch the TV over and over.
My God.
We saw the tape of George Floyd over and over and over, and it did nothing but instill fear into us. We make ourselves sick quicker by living in fear and living in this uncertainty than COVID. It's how we respond to COVID. We have to be able to respond to COVID by not obsessing, not living in fear, and taking care of ourselves.
Thank you. Dr. Jackson, wrap that up.
Sure. So I agree with everything that's been said, and I want to add that what the Association of Black Psychologists has been able to contribute to this is how do we take this moment as a time, again, to center ourselves, to reconnect on who we are, to pay attention to our spiritual well-being. And there's several initiatives that we have in place. We've launched our virtual healing circles that people can jump in and out of as they need to kind of get grounded culturally in a moment. We've also partnered with the is how do we take this moment as a time, again, to center ourselves, to reconnect on who we are, to pay attention to our spiritual well-being. And there's several initiatives that we have in place. We've launched our virtual healing circles that people can jump in and out of as they need to kind of get grounded culturally in a moment. We've also partnered with the National Association of Black Social Workers and other Black organizations where they have launched a website, and we put all of our resources there in one space, all things Black for folks. You can find things not just specific to mental health, but to other social resources you need access to, and it's organized by national as well as by states. And we have been offering a number of different webinars to our communities, engaging them on rituals for self-care, how to bring those practices in. And we've moved all of those over to our YouTube page. Anytime we do those webinars, we're having 1.5K watching it. And we're engaging in conversations with our Black scholars from all over the world. So you're getting a richness of what it means to be healthy and whole from a Black perspective as you're coping with the strategy. And we provided statements and guides to people. Like one of the things, Dr. Nobles created a sheltering in place workbook, which is on that same website I spoke to. There's also the document that we partnered with the Community Healing Network on how do you do self-care, community care, and family care in the midst of this stress. So we've done our due diligence to create a number of different resources to support our people, and they underscore a lot that's been said here. We heal in community with one another and not so much in isolation, going back to what Dr. Barnes was talking about with groups. However, when we look at how we're being compensated, most mental health programs are getting better funding for individual treatment than they are for group, even though we have evidence from evidence-based practices that groups are a better modality for our people. So we will need some support in that type of leveraging, and that too is some of the points is in our 10-point recovery plan.
Thank you. I'll tell you, this has been an amazing town hall, a conversation that is long overdue, and there's so much more that we could cover if we had some more time. But we've come to the end of our time, and I want to make sure that people who are listening, who are concerned, are getting access to information or websites or whatever resources you think are necessary for them. So I'm going to ask if we would start with Dr. Lindsay, Dr. Barnes, Dr. Bryant, and then end up with you, Dr. Jackson, if you have any more references that you want to share with people. Dr. Lindsay?
Yes, thank you, Congresswoman. I thank you, Courtney, for also putting the link up to our website at the McSilver Institute. We're constantly thinking about how do you cope with and understand the impact of COVID, the racial trauma stress that has been happening. And so this link right here, or if you want to quickly get to it, mcsilver.nyu.edu, mcsilver.nyu.edu is a place where we have a repository of all kinds of resources, webinars, one-pagers, and the like.
Thank you, Doc. Dr. Barnes?
Well, basically, I'm just going to hold up the report that we all worked at. Now, if you go to the Representative Coleman's website, if you go to her website, we have a list of all of the resources, and we worked very diligently on putting these together. So please go to her website and get a copy, if you haven't already read it, of Ring the Alarm. And on the back of it is all of the resources that you need.
Thank you, Dr. Barnes. Dr. Bryant?
Yes, those of you who want to see some practical applications of what we are implementing, go to newbirth.org, and you'll be able to see it all at once.
Thank you. And Dr. Jackson, do you have any more resources you want to share with us?
Absolutely. First of all, I would like to ask if we can continue to do more preventive work as well too. And I think it would be wonderful if we can share all of these resources. I want to invite my colleagues and everyone listening on the call to please add resources to the website that's coming out to you now, because they're posting there. We do need one-stop shop for all of our Black needs. And as I said, please visit our website. Please do visit our YouTube page and engage in what we're sharing and see if it's meaningful for you. And we also invite you to look into the Journal of Black Psychology, where you're learning more about the work that we're doing and how it applies within our people, and both from an education, research, and practice stance, all three of those. And then lastly, please do read our books, be part of us, stay in conversation with us. And I want to thank you again for this opportunity, Congresswoman.
Thank you very much. And I want everyone to know that anything you share with us, we will also put on our website for easy collecting for individuals. I can't thank you enough for giving me the time that you've given us today, and the conversation has been really important. It's very encouraging to me every time I do one of these sort of town halls or webinars or whatever. I learn more. I started out knowing very little, just responding to what I saw on my Facebook every day about Black youth suicide, and from there I recognize that we're talking about
bigger, longer, and more significant, not significant in a sense of importance, but in a sense of a lot more needs to take place. And I think that we are operating right now in a very interesting and unique period where we've got the greatest challenges we could have coming at us, but at the same time, that becomes an opportunity, and we don't want to lose the leverage of the opportunity. And so I agree with you all that it's so important that we know who we are, what we stand for, and what we can get through. And being culturally educated is vitally important, Dr. Jackson. So let me thank each and every one of you. God bless you. God bless the work that you're doing. And pray that I see you all soon face to face, where we can do something of this nature, where people can come in and actually touch us, feel us, and we don't have to be masked up and gloved up and whatever. Thank you, and God bless you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Blessings. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
You've been listening to with some pregnant pauses because the internet connection was going in and out, to the Congressional Black Caucus hosting a town hall on Black mental health in 2020. It was sponsored by Representative Bonnie Watson Coleman. And if you go to her website, you can find the resources that she mentioned. I hope, as the various speakers stated, that particularly people of color, as a result of various indignities and things that we have experienced in our lifetime, that we are more at risk. I think one of the speakers made the statement that due to cultural racism, it's led to mental illness. However, she also stated that we're asking the wrong question, that we have to go back to the roots of who we are as a people and understand how did our ancestors get through what they got through. And their DNA is part of our DNA. And so we do have the right stuff to get through this and any crisis that is thrown in our path. Self-care, again, very important. What do you do to take care of yourself, your mind, your body, your spirit? Grounding yourself, being in nature. One of the panelists spoke about fasting from social media and the TV, noting that we make ourselves sick by living in fear. But if we center ourselves and we have some type of spiritual practice, or we're looking after our spiritual well-being, again, we can and will get through this. I want to thank you for listening. Please feel free to leave any comments. Good night.